Good morning once again. Thank you for being here, live and online. I guess you could be live and online combined as well. Today we are back on track discussing the book of Nehemiah. We're pretty much halfway there, which is interesting to me because a couple of weeks ago, we took a break last week for Easter, but a couple of weeks ago there was the reference of the wall being built in 52 days. And superficially, that was kind of the point, building the wall. So you would have imagined, okay, this is a great place to end the book, but here we literally have another half of the book to cover even after the walls were built. I split the section that we are going to cover into two parts. So we're covering chapter 6 from verse 16 to chapter 7 verse 3. But again, we'll do it half and half, basically the remainder of chapter 6 and then the first 3 verses of chapter 7. Let me go ahead and read the portion of chapter 6 that we will cover, and then we'll tackle the other part later. So again, Nehemiah chapter 6 from verse 16. And it happened when all our enemies heard of it, and all our enemies, heard of it, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was done by our God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them, for many in Judah were pledged to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Also they reported his good deeds before me and reported my words to him. Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. Verse 16 is very interesting. Again, the last verse that we covered a couple of weeks ago was a reference that the wall was finished in 52 days. And basically verse 16 just kind of gives a very positive note. All of the enemies, all of the nations surrounding that region, when they noticed that the wall was complete, they were afraid. They were in awe of what had occurred and knew that God, the one and only true God, was the one behind this. And to me, this would have been a great part of the book to end in, wouldn't it? You have a reference to the building of the wall. Thereafter, you have a reference of everyone's reaction, and everybody knew that God was behind this. Just end the book for God's sake. On a great ending. Everyone likes a happy ending? This would have been the happiest of endings. Yet again, we are only halfway through the book. And this is interesting to me because that's kind of part of life. We all wish that it ends on a happy ending. But fact of the matter is, there are ups and downs in life. And you have to deal with both extremes. And here it's a definite up, but guess what it's going to be followed up by? A downer. And what we have in the last 2 verses of this chapter is a major downer, which follows, again, a very high note. What is this downer that is following this high note? There's on verse 17 this little word, which to me it breaks my heart. Also in those days. Again, there's something else that happened in those days, and Nehemiah wants to document that. What happened in those days? Well, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah. Now, let's go and take a trip down memory lane. especially for those who have not been here in these last, few months from the beginning of Nehemiah. We need to know who this character is or was. So let's go through some of these passages, starting off in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, verse 10. This is when we are originally introduced to this person. Again, chapter 2, verse 10. When Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official or servant, depending on your version, heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So we already have a mention here of this individual, Tobiah, and we know that he is up to no good because he does not like the fact that somebody was interested in helping out these exiled Jews that went back to their homeland and still were not thriving, mostly because of, how their society was functioning or not functioning due to the lack of the walls. Now, let's go to verse 19 of that same chapter. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?" So adding to this animosity, just mentioning the fact that the building of the wall would have been an attack to the king. So now they're kind of setting the stage for what is to come. The lies, the deceit, again, the complete animosity towards this building project that not only was about the wall, but that was actually about the people. Going forward to chapter 4, verse 3, now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." Chapter 4 again, verse 7 and 9, or 7 and 8. We'll see when we'll stop here. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. This is the type of person that we're talking about. And finally, chapter 6, the first couple of verses. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors in the gates, that Sanballat, Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono," but they thought to do me harm. So here we have painted a portrait of who Tobiah was. Tobiah was not a friend of the Jews. Tobiah was not a friend of God's people. Tobiah was not a friend of this building project, neither of the wall nor of the Jewish community. Yet it amazes me who these nobles were friendly with: Tobiah. It states here very clearly that the nobles within the Jewish community were friendly with Tobiah, exchanging letters, communicating back and forth, mostly centered around speaking evil regarding Nehemiah, who was shaking things up. Now the question is, why? Clearly, we see evidence here that Tobiah was an enemy. So you can make an argument that these nobles, that they did not know any better. Maybe Tobiah was very good at portraying himself as a friend instead of a foe, being a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will. Yet we see evidence here that that is not completely so. What evidence do we have here in this latter portion of chapter 6 that leads us to believe that this was not just about Tobiah being so cunning that he was tricking these nobles into thinking that he was in fact friendly? There is mention here about the fact that on verse 18 that many in Judah were pledged to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Era, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. Now I had to do a mental image here, and I was even going to illustrate this and project it, but I didn't have enough time. So let me explain what is happening. So there were dealings, there were financial exchanges happening, which is normal, which is not out of the ordinary. However, not only were there certain financial exchanges happening, these exchanges and dealings, they were ratified by marriage, which was relatively common in this day and age. We know that kings, whenever they wanted to make an accord with another nation's leader or king, oftentimes they would ratify that accord by allowing their children to marry one another. So basically, this is what is happening here. Pertaining to the particular names, basically, we have somebody called Shechaniah who was in the family of Era. Now, who was Era? You'd have to backtrack all the way to the book of Ezra. We know that the book of Ezra came before Nehemiah, and Ezra is thought of as the person who was in charge of building the temple. But technically, he wasn't even in charge of building the temple because another person was in charge of doing that. Ezra came after the temple was built because he was going to lead the people into utilizing the temple for religious purposes. But the person who went before him and was the original leader when the exiles were allowed to go back to their homeland was a person called Zerubbabel. And Era was one of these original exiles who went with Zerubbabel in this first generation to rebuild the temple and their community in their homeland. And this person, here referenced as Shechaniah, was the son of Era. We're good so far? Okay. Era came as the first generation of exiles. Era had a son named Jeconiah. We're good? Tobiah married the daughter of Shechaniah. Got it? So they were related by marriage in that regard. And then, not only that, Tobiah, who had children, his son married someone else within the community of the Jews, and this somebody is referenced as Meshullam. So it says here that Tobiah's son married a daughter of Meshullam. Meshullam was actually someone that was part of these groups that built a section of the wall. So there's a reference of him in Nehemiah chapter 3 verse 4 and Nehemiah chapter 3 verse 30. So this is a pretty current person here within our story. So in multiple ways, Tobiah was now related to the Jews. But another factor that we have to add in is the issue of his heritage. Tobiah was not a Jew. Tobiah is referenced as an Ammonite. Now, the Ammonites were, a people who were not very friendly with the Hebrews, to the point where in Deuteronomy, God specifically states that the Ammonites should not have a portion of the community of the Hebrews, or should not be included in that community because of what they had done in the past. There are other portions of scriptures that also speaks to how they were enemies of the Jews. For example, in Solomon's harem, we know that Solomon had many, many wives and concubines. One of his wives was an Ammonite. And we see later in Solomon's life that he started to allow the worship of foreign gods, including a god from the Ammonite religion. So it's obvious that his wife, who was an Ammonite, slowly but surely manipulated him to the point where he would accept these foreign gods. So we see these tidbits of historical information that leads us to believe that this was not condoned by God. And in fact, in the book of Nehemiah, in chapter 13, this is going to be dealt with. I'm not going to touch upon how this is going to be dealt with as far as the marrying between these different cultures and religion. But all of this to say is that this was a serious issue. Again, Tobiah was not a wolf in sheep's clothing. It was very evident that he was an enemy of God. Yet the Jewish nobles were friendly with him because now they had this connection, this bond that was almost unbreakable financially and within their family. And Nehemiah, basically, he was being betrayed because as they were exchanging these information and these letters and communicating back and forth, guess what Tobiah would have? Intelligence. Insight. There's a reference here at the end that says, and reported my words to him. In other words, they would hear what Nehemiah had to say and what he was doing. They would report it to Tobiah, and Tobiah, amongst the other enemies, they would scheme up things and try to deter the progress that was occurring there. Think about this for a second. Think about what is happening here, what Nehemiah just documented. After this great high of building the wall, of documenting the fact that all of the nations knew that God was behind this, now there is this great lull of betrayal. This had to be heart-wrenching to Nehemiah. It's heart-wrenching to me because if I look at everything that has occurred till this point and all of the obstacles, all of the animosity, all of the attacks, to me personally, this is the worst. This is literally betrayal. It's one thing for you to try to defend yourself against enemies. It's even different for you to just try to deal within the problems from within the community. But now you're sensing that within the community, there were people who were betraying Nehemiah. Again, to me, this is the worst thing of all, and I would have been utterly upset. I would have been livid. Now, everybody deals with anger differently, right? Is that a fair statement? I'm not a violent person per se, so I've never felt like punching somebody in the face when I get angry. I'm not a person who curses, so it really never slips out, but I'm a screamer. When I get old, in my tombstone, there's going to be a reference of Old Yeller. Not because of the color, but I'm a screamer. And if I was Nehemiah here, I would have spent the next 2 chapters just talking about this issue. And it would have been in all caps. Hebrews already all caps, but the translation would have been in bold, all caps, regarding how I was upset and how I was just livid about this betrayal. And what amazes me about the way that Nehemiah is documenting this is the following verse. Look at what the following verse says, chapter 7. Then it was, when the wall was built, and I had hung the doors, when the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had appointed, that I gave the charge of Jerusalem to my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the leader of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. And I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun is hot, and while they stand guard, let them shut and bar the doors, and appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, one at his watch station and another in front of his own house. Do you know what amazes me? There is no reference of how Nehemiah dealt with this issue. And it seems like he didn't deal with it. Just goes on to another portion of the story. And the question is why? Why do we not have a reference? Why do we not have a couple of chapters of how Nehemiah was dealing with this betrayal? As far as we know, in light of what is here in Scripture. And the simple answer is, he had better things to do. That's the simple answer. It seems like Nehemiah was planning to return to the king's court. Remember in the beginning of the story when there was this dialogue between Nehemiah and the king? And part of that dialogue had to do with the king's question pertaining to how long it would take. And we don't really see a reference to a time frame there, but it is obvious that the king expected Nehemiah to return after the wall was built. So here, Nehemiah was organizing everything so that he could return to the king's court. Now, we also have a reference within a couple of chapters that Nehemiah had this office for a period of 10 years. But it is likely within these 10 years that he would go back and forth between the king's court and then, governing this region. But while he was away, he would set people in place and organize things so that things would function in an orderly fashion during his absence. So here there's a reference of Nehemiah electing multiple leaders. One of them is that original person who first gave him the insight regarding the Jews and their state in their homeland, Hanani. Here there's a reference of him being his brother. We don't know that he was technically or biologically his brother. Most likely it's a relationship title, not necessarily biological title, but this was a godly man, along with this other person who had a very similar name, who, were in charge regarding different aspects of the Jewish community. And also there's a reference here to when they were supposed to open the gates and close the gates, reference with regards to having guards. Basically, only open the gates when you are ready to defend the walls. Why? Because walls are useless unless they are guarded. You can breach walls. You can climb walls. You need a watchtower. You need watchmen. So again, Nehemiah was organizing things. He knew that this was important, even much more important than this betrayal here, which again must have been agonizing. And when I thought about this premise that I'm trying to build, naturally, as far as an application is concerned, I thought about life. As I alluded to already, full of ups and downs, correct? We would hope that our life would start here, and then it would just build up slowly but surely, and then it just ends on a high, but everything is just kind of progressing towards this happy ending. But we know that that is not real life. Real life is full of ups and downs. And using a military war analogy, it is literally impossible for you to fight this war and win all fronts. Do you get the analogy? This is the war, and you have many battles, many ups and downs. It is literally impossible for you to invest time, energy, effort, yourself in every one of these fronts and every one of these battles. So what must you do? What is that old saying? Pick your battles. And I believe what is happening here, it's Nehemiah picking his battles because he had a choice. Look, I have to go back. I got to go back to the king's court. The walls are done. I have to report back. Now, I just found out that I have enemies from within. People literally who are betraying myself and the Lord. But I also have to put my ducks in a row. Is that how it goes? I can't just leave or just spend so much time on this without organizing everything so that in my absence, everything is just, ruined. So I have to pick my battles. And I'm not going to focus so much energy and myself upon what has occurred already. And I really, truly don't have much control over that. I will focus my efforts and time upon that which I do have control, which is, again, the organizing of the community in my absence. And I think oftentimes we must do that. In life, we must do that. Because again, we cannot win every battle. And what is most difficult is this. You have to evaluate what is more important or most important. And I don't know if it's most of the time, but I know at the very least, oftentimes, that which is you're most passionate about is really not what is most important. Again, you may be furious about something. You may be very passionate about something. You may be very connected and invested. But that may not be the most important thing. Something else may be more important. And you have to make this choice. You have to make the choice of, look, I just have to allow God to take care of this because there's something more important that I must invest my time and energy on. I must pick my battles, even though, again, I'm very passionate about this particular battle. It is not the most important. And as we progress through life, as we move forward, I think this is one of the most important tools and insights. And this applies to many facets of our lives. Marital relationships, it's all about this. Wouldn't you agree? Picking your battles, my wife tells me that every other week while I'm screaming. Professional life, other types of relationships, church life. There are truly things that are the most important, and there are other things that are secondary. And if we learn, as we progress in life, if we learn to make these choices wisely, I believe that we can truly be a part of what Paul was referencing pertaining to his life track. What was Paul's life track? He mentioned there in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that he was progressing towards the goal of fighting the good fight. How was he doing that? Finishing out his race and keeping the faith. And I think part of fighting the good fight is being able to select which battle you're going to invest in, which one you're going to pick, which one is most important to God. And it's not to say that these things are not going to be dealt with. It's literally this exercise of putting things in perspective and allowing God to do that which He's best at, the impossible, that which we have very little control over. So again, pick your battles and progress towards the finish line. Amen?